Hello everyone, this is part 13 of What If Naruto Met Past Hinata, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. Hinata's skin had betrayed her. It had sped itself open and shown all her M. Not literally of course, but metaphorically enough so that she wanted to curl up into a hole. She'd never felt so standing there in front of Kiba Inuzuka and Shino Aburame as they bore their eyes into her body, plainly ogling her as though they really couldn't believe it. It was strange considering she was actually wearing a rather bulky piece of attire at the moment. It's just, she said, pulling the edges of the offensive clothing closer around her. The shoulders drooped over her own and she hadn't bothered to stick her arms in the sleeves, rather, she was probably a bit too afraid for that. She was wearing an old t-shirt with a trademark swirl and a very familiar orange and black jacket. Yes, definitely. She was sure if she made any kind of movement to actually put on the jacket, Kiba would have a conniption. His eyes were wide as he stared at her, as though he might just seize up at any moment. Shino looked suspicious, and when Shino was obviously suspicious you knew there was a problem. Hinata. Kiba started slowly, staring at the girl whose hair was fly away, whose face was pink and whose eyes were almost as wide as his own. He raised his titan hand towards the 17-year-old girl with apprehension, as though he didn't really want to know the answer. Hinata, where is your shirt? Hinata went apple red and stared at her feet. Well, you see, it got, and Naruto and, well, it was. Shino felt himself sigh internally, but the rigid stance he held did not relent just because Hinata was embarrassed, on the contrary. His whole mood seemed to darken because with her stuttering came the unpleasant feeling that she had done something with that boy. Based on Kiba's fingers still dangling unsurely in the air, eyes hard and dull, he'd probably realize any second that the trigger to his basic instinct to fulfill his earlier promise of, if he puts one grubby finger on her person I will seriously eat him. Seriously, was about to be switched. Shino believed him. Naruto was as good as processed dog food. Seriously. They were standing on the street outside of Naruto's apartment where they'd passed on their way to an older, less crowded training ground. Hinata had only recently been allowed out of the house, but it seemed every moment since her accident had been spent by a certain guilty and rather dizzy Naruto Uzumaki. Shino wasn't saying he didn't like Naruto. He admired him, gave him his due credit, but Hinata was something else. This was Hinata. He supported her, loved her like a little sister and had silently vowed to be her constant caretaker after the shock at seeing her body so marred by blood he had to be told it was her. Sure, by caretaker he meant unseen, a black dot on her clothing perhaps, but constant always, although this moment now was pure, shocking coincidence. He'd sworn he'd never see Kiba look like that again. The boy he knew so well hadn't cried that way since they were young. He'd never see her lie so motionless again. He'd never feel the lead in his stomach thinking that maybe, just maybe, he might lose his cool this time. So, he'd said whatever equaled problem in Hinata's life would equal danger. He would eliminate the danger, although, even Shino had moments when his protective nature went a little too far. But then again, what was being a silent, shadowy, mysterious genius if you didn't have a little fun with being ignored? So it came as no surprise as Shino looked upon his best friend for a second time and gave him nothing but a small, simple push in the proper direction. Kiba, he said softly, and the poor, still horribly unsure, dog boy looked his way pathetically. Yes, she was in his apartment. Her shirt is still in his apartment. He turned his head slightly. Do you understand what that entails, Kiba? Kiba's brain seemed to turn slowly in his skull, the little mouse on the treadmill slowing to a swinging stop as it stared ahead, head seed. Shino rolled his eyes behind his sunglasses. What do you think Naruto was in Kiba, based on the information present? He turned to the girl standing in front of the complex's beat-up doors watching them both with anxiety. His apartment, Kiba said and Shino blinked unseen. Who else was in his apartment, Kiba? Quote. Hinata. Now, if Hinata's shirt was in the apartment, and Naruto was in the apartment. Is the following statement true or false given your ninja tactics and logic at divulging information based on this given situation? Kiba looked perplexed and Shino took a breath, controlling his tone to a neutral drone that left Kiba looking puzzled. Shino had a real talent for confusing him when he wanted to. Naruto was in Hinata's shirt. The little mouth twitched and visibly it came out as a spasm of Kiba's right eye. Naruto was in Hinata's. Shino watched in silent satisfaction as Kiba processed the mental image and with a final snap his face turned a dangerous shade of purple. Hinata, having watched the whole thing, instantly flung herself forward in distress. Kiba. Shino, stop it. That isn't true. Kiba, it's false. The answer is false. Hey, Hina-chan, here's your shirt. You left it on my bed after you took it off. The following transaction was often displayed as legendary, and many poor bystanders said it took on the look of snapshots of a horrible trauma as Kiba Inuzuka leapt on the future Hokage of Konoha with enough ferocity it appeared he might in fact devour his face, given the chance. What ensued left Hinata gaping, Naruto bruised and a bit worse for wear and a certain GR juice-stained shirt fluttering pitifully in the wind. And only Shino smiled, knowing he'd been wrong. It's not like I can do anything about it, Naruto. Hinata said softly, fussing with the obi on her kimono. Why couldn't I just wear, my normal clothes? Hinata sighed and looked at the young man in front of her with a smidgen of hopelessness. He was standing there, looking quite irritated in his attire, and she could almost feel the discomfort radiating off of him with each passing moment. Seriously, Hinata. This, really, he continued, picking up the edge of the multi-layered robes and long tassels drooping from the pin at his inline. Hinata blinked. It did look a little ridiculous. Everyone has to wear them, Naruto. It's not my idea. It's just how it is, she said simply, giving her own belt one last final pat before slipping her toes into the sandals near her feet. Naruto had only appeared a few moments ago, escorted by a very sour-faced servant. Convincing Naruto to even attend the Hyuga New Year was a task within itself, seeing as he'd been already invited to go out with Shikamaru and Chuji to the all-night special down at the barbecue restaurant. Hinata had almost been sad. She hadn't been invited to a New Year party since her academy days when Sakura had extended the offer, only to be politely refused for the sake of her family's serious, yet somehow routine celebrations. But her father had insisted. And when Hiyashi insisted, it was more of a demand, and you never fell short with Hiyashi. Still, Hinata had found it strange. It had only been half a year, but it seemed she and Naruto had already become something, as dysfunctional and strange and hard to explain as that something was. It had started out an accident, but then it became purposeful because there was something that lingered under the surface of their relationship that made people confused. Neither of them could tell you which way was up about it, just that it had fallen into place like some kind of fated, awkward destiny. Still, forever was still a long time off, and they were definitely not an item, but more like closer friends that could be trusted with such things as family gatherings or grocery shopping when Naruto couldn't find the time, therefore being entrusted with a spare key to his apartment. That was another odd compulsion. Hinata, for reasons unknown, was constantly concerned about how much he was eating, or if he was going to fast or training too much. She'd never tell him, but she worried silently from time to time, and so it became something of small happiness when she was thanked for the full pantry when he got home from a mission. So he was attending the banquet and Hinata was feeling helplessly tired of the whole thing, and now, standing there and looking ridiculous, Naruto was already starting to get unhappy with the whole idea, and for once was not cautious in showing his dislike to her. Probably because father doesn't hide his dislike of Naruto, Hinata thought silently, thinking of the underhanded comments they'd passed the few times they had met in actual person. But then again, Naruto was never exactly discreet about his feelings of people he didn't exactly care for. Naruto, you don't have to go, she said finally, moving past him towards the door. I wouldn't blame you. It won't be much fun unless they start drinking. Then we could probably get out early, she stated matter-of-factly. Naruto looked guilty for a moment and moved to follow her. Well, it's not that I don't want to go with you, but what's the point? I mean, I've never really had a formal family, so I guess I just don't get why everyone has to be so freaking serious all the time about stupid parties. Hinata looked at Naruto and attempted to convey the reasoning, or at least find a point. Well, I know you don't get understand, but, she started, before immediately regretting it, hand lingering on the door. Naruto looked at her quizzically. What? She looked helplessly at the door. Well, it's like it happens every year, it's automatic. It's not that we're, well, serious about it, but you just do it. The same way Nejine has to wear the robes, just as my father has to wear his robes, just as I have to do the wine ceremony, it's just ingrained in us, I guess. Naruto seed an eyebrow. You mean, Neji has to wear this? He gestured to the horribly complicated and embellished ensemble he was wearing, and Hinata nodded innocently. Only, his is even more elaborate because he's an actual family member, but my father has the most elaborate, I suppose. He can barely walk in it. Naruto looked at Hinata and a small smile pulled at his mouth. Your dad will be wearing this. Hinata looked unsure, and plucked at her own kimono. Well, of course, it's the way it is. He has to wear this big hat too, and he braids his hair. She started, trying to describe the sight of her father in his New Year's gowns, and having difficulty. He braids his hair, Naruto said, now grinning. Hinata blushed. Well, Hyuga men take their hair very seriously, it's like an old status thing, only now it's not very popular, but Neji and my father and a lot of the other main house members still do it. Oh Hinata, that is rich. I thought this was going to be boring as hell, but now, I wouldn't trade anything for the sight of your dad in a dress. Hinata smiled insecurely, but then she found herself giggling as she thought about it. Sure, she was a Hyuga, sure she was supposed to be stoic, but the whole premise was sort of funny. And to be quite honest, she'd never thought of it that way, but it almost seemed like Neji and her father were in fact wearing dresses. Hinata just kept chuckling to herself silently as she motioned for Naruto to follow. For now, she'd let Naruto decide for himself whether or not seeing her cousin in ceremonial makeup was worth the sake of tradition. Naruto. Silence. Naruto, please, talk to me. Hinata touched the boy's motionless shoulder, blue eyes unseeing. Don't touch me, he whispered, and Hinata instantly recoiled. He put his hand on his face, disbelieving. Did you see the way he looked at me? Hinata put her hands over her chest, aching to be near him. His hands slid up to his hair, raking through the spikes, his clothes were torn up and muddy, his face cut in multiple places. Naruto. Bastard, he screamed, throwing his fist against the wall, plaster chipping away. Hinata felt herself stumble backwards as Naruto dissolved onto the floor, falling with the bits of sheet rock. Naruto, she whispered, kneeling beside him in the center of the room. She wrapped her arms around him. Naruto sobbed into her shoulder. When Sasuke came home, Naruto always imagined he'd smile. Once, Naruto was asked by a friend if he'd ever miss being in the field if he became Hokage, and Naruto, being Naruto, told him that being in an office all day surpassed any week of cold or rainy missions, any food ration bar, or any cut or bruise, no matter how noble the process of the injury was. He would be glad to rest his feet. At the time, it was the answer. For a very long time it had been the answer. It was all he had ever intended of himself. But there was a time when Naruto wouldn't have traded a mission for the world because it meant he got to go home to her. He always went as quietly as possible. He never took to windows like Kakashi. He always used the front door. She didn't like the drafts, plus he was quite positive that she would most likely mistake him if he had pulled a stunt like that. He always took his boots off first. There was that one occasion with the new carpet. How mud got on the ceiling even Naruto couldn't tell you. He always walked into darkness. She didn't like leaving lights on because she couldn't sleep that way if she slept at all while he was gone. Naruto always had to watch where he stepped. There would most likely be things on the floor, take-out boxes on the coffee table. Cooking seemed silly to her if he wasn't there to eat it. There would be clothes on the kitchen table, laundry another task that seemed pointless if it was only hers, and she'd abandon it halfway through, most of his clothes drooping off the sides and onto the floor. Dishes would be piled in the sink. He could almost see her, putting them down, flustered and frustrated, after her concentration waned. That little novelty frog clock she'd bought to christen the apartment theirs would be ticking on the windowsill, where it would always belong, showing off the odd hours of the night. He'd shed his armor and his shirt, and in the kitchen, the smell of blood still hot in the threads. It didn't bother him much anymore. But she always ran her fingers over the stains, and he'd watch her out of the corner of his eye as she worried them with her hands. He'd smile in the bathroom at the scattered candles set on the side of the tub. She always tried to relax, to enjoy the absence of his loud company, or the new impulsive Polaroids taped to the mirror. She always thought of him. She had to take the pictures. What if she couldn't remember a moment when he got home? He smirks and fingers a corner of one of them, Ino's 20th birthday party. Sakura looks drunk and happy. He doesn't feel bad. She'll tell him all about it, in so much detail it's like he was there. He'll notice the candle wicks haven't been lit. She probably just resorted to taking a shower, what with her hair getting so long. He'll walk out of the bathroom, finally clean and let the sliver of light from the bathroom door shed itself onto their small bedroom. She'll have a million excuses in the morning, he's sure, to why nothing's done, why she couldn't do it, but he'll just smile. Or maybe he'll kiss her. Naruto once swore he'd give it up in a heartbeat. He comes home starving, cold and dirty as hell. He reeks of death sometimes. But how else will he ever get to come home to Hinata, thrown over the bed, book still in her hands, shirt still on, in a pair of sweats? How will he come home to his oldest t-shirt curled under her chin, pressed against the side of her face? He'd give up Hokage. He'd give up Hokage for chores, and Hinata in the middle of the night. Sora didn't try to be bad, it fell out of him, these ornery behaviors. He didn't know what else to do with himself except act out. He'd been in a very dark, cramped world, for a long time, long enough that a boy like himself spent most days throwing him against the walls. And yet, to his intense frustration, he never grew an inch. He stayed small, still a child, still useless and not able to do what he wanted. His body was a foreign vessel, and often he felt blind to its potential, and even more often betrayed by its clumsiness and unwillingness to work. He'd never stretched his legs, or seen himself in the sunlight. What else was there to know in darkness and small spaces where he bumped against the walls? He shared a house with such a tangle of other boys and girls that he couldn't tell where they began and he ended, and that's when he took to throwing himself against the cages, rattling the bars, clawing at the exits. But he didn't know any better. He thought those walls were only extensions of him, limits his body couldn't overcome, it was so dark and cramped. He met the lady on a shady day in the market square when he should have been at school, but he didn't do so well there. He didn't know how to talk to his teacher or the other kids except to yell. How could they hear him otherwise? He was separated by heavy iron. He could see them, but they couldn't see through the thick metal of his walls, even though he threw himself against it with frightening clangs and clatters of the steel curtains between him and them. He just wanted to be big. He wanted to break out and be free and be a man. He hated being 12 and stupid and useless. He just wanted for someone to see that he was okay. That he could do things for others. He was sick of being a child. The lady had been wearing white, and her hair was the color of glossy black bird feathers and it glittered like them too, and she was smiling so nicely at him. Would you like me to buy you one? She'd asked as his hungry eyes had drank in the summer produce, glossy plums and peaches and summer squash at the produce stall. Fat strawberries and hot chili powder in sacks on the table nearby. He'd stared at her for the longest time and that pretty smile. He'd held out his hand and she'd put a coin on the counter and put the peach in his palm. She'd hesitated though. Only if you help me with my bag though, all right. He nodded. Sure. He would have taken it. He would have stolen it right from under her pretty nose. The money too. Snatched from the counter in a second. He'd done it before. What's your name? Sora. What a pretty name, she'd said happily, walking to the next stall. He followed her, holding the bag in his hands. She was so bright, he couldn't keep his eyes off of her. She was the moon in the sky, the good quiet, the good darkness. He reminded him of his mother. But he doesn't remember her very well anymore. What weather. It's so gloomy, the shopkeeper said, holding out her change at one stop along the street. She only laughed and Sora kept the peach and the bag in his hands, still uneaten, still unrifled through. He could have gone through it. Filled his pockets. Her wallet was in there, he'd seen. Not as gloomy as my home, she'd exclaimed, putting her purchases into the bag in his hands. The woman tending the stall nodded. Hi. Everyone misses your dear husband when he's away. She waved at the lady, and then turned to him. Such a nice young man. Please come again. Sora didn't know what to say, but waved feebly back. Didn't she know he was a bad kid? He'd never been called nice before. It must have been her. They came to the end of the road and Sora held the peach in his hands carefully. He'd save it for later, after dinner or something. If you ever want to help me with groceries again, Sora-kun, I'd be glad for the company. You were a very good help. He looked up suddenly. Oh, he said, and the blush scattered across his cheeks. Thanks, for the fruit, he muttered and the lady laughed. Maybe next time my husband will come along, he's out of town at the moment. He'd like you very much, in fact you remind me of him. Sora blinked at the lady who smiled so nicely at him and put the peach in his pocket. Okay, he said and the woman nodded in accord, not put off by his childish embarrassment. Bye Sora-kun. Sora felt the fruit sink into his pocket. Everyone is gloomy when your dear husband is away. Hey, what's your husband like? 'Cause if he's a loser, then I don't want him to come. Sora shouted and the woman with indigo hair looked back and smiled. He's a lot like the sun. Sometimes he's too much, but things just come to life when he's around. Sora didn't see her again, but he looked for her when he skipped out on school, but even then he tried not to do that so much. He didn't want to disappoint her. He didn't want her to think her fruit had gone for nothing. The day he met his new sensei thought of her. He thought of her when he saw his sensei with wild yellow hair and a large grin and tightened skin and those weird whiskers. Sensei told him all that they were somebody. Sora told his sensei he was an idiot. The man just smiled and laughed and said, probably. And then he asked him to come to dinner at his house and Sora refused. He refused for weeks and weeks, but it was starting to get hot inside his cage, like sunlight was leaking under the edges of the doors. It was getting even more cramped. His knees were bumping the doorways, his head was hitting the walls. It smelled heavily of peaches and nice words and ladies with indigo hair. He wanted to see her again. Hear her ask him if he wanted to maybe hold her bag like last time. He'd say yes. He wanted to follow her around and he wanted to go home to her house and have her cook him whatever she was making with all that stuff she bought. She wanted to see this husband, because he was a fool for leaving her ever and he'd tell him so. She'd tell him she was somebody. Sensei had told him that after all, he was good for some stuff. But he couldn't see her because he was always away, or training, or with Sensei. And his cage kept getting hotter and hotter, and he was hungry all the time for something he didn't know, and his head kept hitting the ceiling. Months went on. Sensei told him about life lessons and people that he loved. The other two hung on to every word but Sora could only think of one. She had long hair and a pretty smile, and if her husband was the sun, then she was probably the moon. But Sensei was, probably, an idiot, and when he enlisted Sora's help for his anniversary, Sora had begrudgingly accepted, because what would she do? She would have helped him. Sora, one day you're going to find a girl who makes you crazy. I just hope she's half as wonderful as my wife. Sora didn't think his wife was so special. She wasn't as wonderful as her, he bet. She was the most wonderful, but she would have wanted him to help so he continued. The hair combs were beautiful, they'd look almost as wonderful on his wife as they would on her. Hey Sensei, does she have long hair? It didn't take long after that to convince Sora to go to his house that evening. He wanted to see for himself this wonderful wife, the one that made his quite strong and interesting Sensei act so stupid. See for himself if there was really anyone that could compare. His house was nice, it had a large lawn and rooms that made you feel like you could really stretch your legs and lay out. Sunlight poured in because there were windows and a long attached porch to the back end facing the low garden wall and the regiment of potted plants. Hina-chan, we're here, his sensei had said, walking both of them into the kitchen. Sora hesitated for a moment before he saw her. His mouth dropped to the floor as she surfaced from behind the wall, wearing a long apron and that beautiful smile. Sora felt his eyes widen as she stepped up to him and his sensei put a hand roughly on his head, ruffling the hair. This is Sora-kun. Hinata smiled down at the boy with stormy gray eyes and watched as he stared at her. Naruto must not have told him it was her, just like she'd made him promise. She'd wanted it to be a surprise. She continued to smile at him as she went to a counter, took out a peach, and put it in his waiting palm. Sora felt the sun break through the rough stone, seeping through his sensei's hand and onto the floor, casting its bright fingers over his entire body. The tears leaked down without him even noticing, as in a giant heave of air he ruptured the cage and left it tangled behind him, and everything was white and hot and living. And that pretty lady who made him nice and that sensei that made him somebody were right there. Sun and moon and Sora could, maybe, be the sky too. Hinata looked at the boy who'd seen a lot of trouble in just a few years of life and smiled so surely at him and told him the one thing he'd always hoped to hear. You've grown. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.